And there was some comments, man. Stephen A. Smith. We know that there was real beef between our brother Matthew Broder and Stephen A. Smith.
Yeah,
man.
Street beef for real.
Some straight up street beef, man. They was putting dirt on each other's names, and there were some comments that on the surface everybody was like, yeah. When you just saw the quotes of JB Bickerstaff should be coach of the year, and that he's shell shocked by what the Detroit Pistons are doing this season. We've been saying JB should be coach of the year for some weeks and months now. But there was another little comment that came out of there. Should we just let the clip speak for itself, fam?
Hey, we can let both of them, and we can react to both of them afterwards. Go ahead and play them both, JB, please.
I said that J.J. Redick for the Los Angeles Lakers is a Coach of the Year candidate. I did not say he's Coach of the Year. J.B. Bickerstaff is the Coach of the Year. I can't believe, I am shell-shocked at what I have seen from Detroit. I'm so happy for Malik Beasley. Cade Cunningham, this brother's averaging over 25 a game. He's averaging over 9 assists per game. This brother is special. Former #1 overall pick, 11th in the NBA in scoring, 3rd in assists, okay? I just told you about Malik Beasley. You're looking at the Pistons. They're 6th seed in the Eastern Conference right now. They would avoid the play-in. This is a year after they went 14-68 with a 28-game losing streak, okay? I'm looking at that. I'm looking at them ending a 12-game skid against Boston 2 nights after ending a 10-game skid against the Clippers. And I want to say this name because you don't hear this name almost never. His name is Troy Weaver. He is the former assistant GM in OKC who was running things in Detroit before they let him go. He picked this squad. Langdon hired J.B. Bickerstaff. Those players are Weaver. He gave them about $60 million in cap space. He picked these players. We don't mention him enough. And I want to say this name because you don't hear this name almost never. His name is Troy Weaver. He is the former assistant GM in OKC.
I didn't realize that the second one was just an extension of just the Troy Weaver on its own. And that one clip, he mentioned them both. But interesting. I'll just say that
it got a lot of engagement, as I'm sure Stephen A. Smith knew it was going to get here in Detroit in the great state of pure Michigan. And I stand on exactly what I've continued to stand on. And we even had Rob Murphy, who was here in the building. He was an assistant GM for the Pistons and general manager and president of the Motor City Cruise while he was here during some of Troy Weaver's tenure. And he told you guys what it was as well. Some of the picks that he definitely had a hand in, and how his evaluations went. And when you talk about the player evaluation, these young guys, that was a lot of Troy Weaver flipping in different picks to get back into the first round, to get guys like Isaiah Stewart, to get guys like Marcus Sasser. That was him. And when you look at the free agents signings, the Tobias Harris one was one that we knew was going to happen. I don't know how much of that was actually him. I think that one was probably an organizational signing. And that's not to take away from what we've seen Trajan Langdon already do by getting probably the biggest prize in a Malik Beasley as a free agent. That, to me, has been one of the things that sparked things. But when you talk about the assessments and making those right picks, we remember during those drafts, these weren't just picks. Cade Cunningham is the one that I walk away with saying, yeah, that's a no-brainer.
Slam dunk.
But there were still people talking about, is it Jalen Green? Is it Cade? I thought it was a slam dunk. There were some people who thought it should have been Evan Mobley. I remember even before. And that's probably more of an argument. But when you look at some of the other picks, there was so much controversy around, or conversation and debate around who it should be. Asar Thompson, I remember the conversation. When we were saying it was going to be the home run pick, and even though we were like, look, if you want to go short, get a Jarris Walker. If you want the home run, go Asar. A lot of people were like, why would you go get a high schooler who's only played against high schoolers? That's what I remember the conversation being.
Yeah.
It wasn't some notion where it was like, yeah, when the notion was, the conversation was around Jaden Ivey. There was a lot of people who were not for that pick. And so it's like, today I hear people say, no, all those picks were just, those are the perfect picks. Jalen Duren slid down.
Mm-hmm.
They said that they had Jalen Duren in their top 5 of their draft board. That if when they got to 13, he knew, nope, got to go and make that pick. They made the trade. I know how people feel about that draft pick, but how do people feel about that draft pick right now?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Nobody cares. You're looking at what Jalen Duren is becoming, and that's where you do have to tip your cap. Now, did he undermine himself? Yes, he did, by not properly building around this team. And that's where it's like, you give him, you compartmentalize it. You give him credit for what he did to bring in those young players that everybody knows is going to be pillars for Detroit Pistons' success for times to come. But he didn't do enough to help them, which takes away from how much you want to go and wave the pom-poms for Troy Weaver.
Right.
No, and honestly, I love how we almost completely glossed over what he said about JB Bickerstaff, which yes, JB Bickerstaff is absolutely the coach of the year. And I'm not blaming you, by the way, because I'm actually more intrigued with what he said about Troy Weaver. But JB Bickerstaff is obviously the coach of the year. I'm glad that national media is starting to recognize. I guess when you think about it, if there's any competition, I think Kenny Atkinson could be second or third, but I would still put JB Bickerstaff over Kenny Atkinson because of what JB Bickerstaff inherited, a team that won 14 wins last year, the turnaround, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to the Troy Weaver comments,
just real quick, just to add, that is part of my narrative. Yeah. It's what you talk about. Yeah. The teams you inherited. JB Bickerstaff inherited a lot of work. The first and third historically worst seasons on record.
They're not supposed to be here right now.
But Atkinson inherited JB Bickerstaff's team.
That's why I said second or third or something like that.
There you go.
And JJ Redick does deserve some votes, by the way, just for the record. People called him Podcast Boy. Now people are seeing that Darvin Ham was a bum. But anywho, that's my personal narrative.
Even Bronny James is looking much better than I think people thought.
In the G League.
It's in that JJ Redick system, though.
Yeah.
JJ Redick's a very smart, but this isn't about JJ Redick. This is about the Pistons and Troy Weaver and everything. But I will say this, and this is where I actually disagree with a lot of what I'm hearing. You can give Troy Weaver some credit. You'll hear some people say, like, he gets no credit, he gets negative credit, he was the worst GM ever, it doesn't matter. All of those picks were obvious. And I'm like, I beg your pardon? People are saying that Asar Thompson was the no-doubt pick.
We remember the conversations, Flannel. We were here in this studio.
Yeah.
We remember the chat.
A lot of people thought he was the lesser of the two brothers.
I got comment sections to prove it.
I am not trying to act like Troy Weaver did a good job. It's just you can give credit where credit is due. He did draft Cade Cunningham. He did draft Jaden Ivey. He did draft Jalen Duren, he drafted Asar Thompson, and he drafted Isaiah Stewart. Were Killian Hayes and Sadiq Bey misses? Yes. Did he do a great job building around all of those guys? Certainly not. But you can give credit where credit is due. It's possible to just say, those were some nice draft picks, and I'm really glad that we have Trajan Langdon instead now.
Yep.
That's not hard to do. You don't have to act like Troy Weaver had no part in this. You can give him his proper credit without glazing. That's the problem with sports discourse this day. Now I'm a Troy Weaver apologist, according to some people.
Right,
I'm sure you are
You're
too,
a Weaver bot.
I
finally get to say this to you. You're a Troy bot.
You're right.
I remember the day he said that to me. I was so hurt.
And that's the thing.
No, for real, y'all. He was...
But for real, no,
I might have been,
that is a great full circle moment. I will give you that. But here's the thing, though. I have no problem with giving Bob Quinn credit for Ragnow and Decker. I have no problem with giving Al Avila credit for
the table on us the other day with that.
Riley Green, Tarek Skubal, Parker Meadows. No problem whatsoever with that. But I can also acknowledge that none of those guys that I mentioned were successful here. I'm happy as hell we have Scott Harris, Brad Holmes, and Trajan Langdon now.
Yes.
But you can also be like, nice job, guys. You don't have to act like they were complete nothings here, even though they were not successes. I repeat, not successes.
This is what I like in Troy Weaver, too. And because you saw what the Pistons organization did. They've been really, really good with, if they believe someone has contributed to our organization, you know what? We're going to make sure people know that. They go out of their way to do that. The Pistons did that with Troy Weaver. That's why in their press release, they put out there what it was. And there were opportunities for him to stay with the organization. They wanted to retain him the same way they did another great basketball mind in Dwayne Casey. It's just, he was like, all right, I'm just going to kind of move on. I know these guys are in good hands. So, you know what? Shout out to, and to be able to, obviously, when you got a Trajan Langdon coming in, it was, everybody just needed a clean break. And so you make the point. That's why I said it as well. Compartmentalize it. He did good as it related to the drafting and getting that in here, but he undermined his own success. And that's the thing. You're judged based on that success. Even Joe Dumars, who bought a championship here, that guy, by the end of it, though, you see how he was judged. It's crazy. If he didn't win a championship, I'm glad he won all those championships because he's a player that deserves more than he gets right now. Troy Weaver didn't even win a championship, And so I understand where people's ire is because he didn't even make a playoff appearance. We didn't even sniff the play-in. And so that's why I understand where people are coming from. But where you and I are completely in lockstep is compartmentalize it. Because this is what I can tell you. I haven't seen a GM go out and do what he did in a matter of 3 or 4 years with the amount of young talent he has. We're talking about Cade, Duran, Asar, just in terms of the high-level young talent that they have to be able to go on. And we do know that Troy Weaver did have Ron Holland #1 on his big board, which was confirmed by Rod Murphy.
Yeah.
That's fair. Go ahead, KG.
Nah, I think Stephen A. When I heard those comments yesterday, I had to look at myself and say, yeah, he's mostly right. And like you said, Sam, it doesn't have to be the tale of two extremes. We can meet in the middle and say he does deserve credit for a decent number of things with what's going on with this Pistons squad. But at the same time, I think just, it coincided with one philosophy change from upstairs as well, but I'll get more into that in a second. It's funny you brought up Al Avila because that's how I really look at Troy Weaver. I have historically said on this network that Al Avila didn't necessarily pick bad players, but when it comes to trades and free agency, that's where he fell short. 100%. And I feel a lot of that same sentiment for a Troy Weaver. He didn't necessarily draft bad players except maybe Killian Hayes, but when you look at the type of veterans that he brought in to pair around Cade, that wasn't good. When you look at some of the trades that he makes, you already know I'm a Sadiq Bey simp, and hey, you call me what you will about it, but the fact that you traded him for James Wiseman wasn't really the best move at the time, and I do get it, but there was a lot of things regarding Troy Weaver that just ran a little thin. You look at the fact that they openly tried to tank and things of that nature, but people have to also remember, like I said, it kind of coincided with a philosophy change upstairs. The Tellums had a good stranglehold on some of the decisions being made around this team at the time Troy Weaver was in charge. And that was the big thing that we were really talking about. How much is the Tellum influence really hampering Troy Weaver's decisions?
I had whole articles on it.
Yeah, no, seriously. And when Trajan came in, you kind of had your owner, Tom Gores, face the media and take responsibility for how he's run things over the last 15 years or so, saying that I haven't really been present, I was kind of hands off, and I wasn't necessarily putting the right people in place to handle things while I'm not around, which is why he wanted a more CEO like mindset, which is why he went out and got a Trajan. And the big thing in Trajan's on his side of things is that he went out and got a coach that was perfect for this team. He went out and paired the right veterans around Cade Cunningham, and you're seeing the fruits of that labor, instantly. But, I just really feel like when you come into a situation like this, and you got to give Troy Weaver credit for also cleaning up the books, because coming into a situation where your books were on the cleaner side of things, I think that also goes a long way in helping the next regime. But you got to give Troy Weaver credit for some of the things that we are seeing with this Pistons team right now.
And just to kind of, add on to what you're saying there, these are things that we covered aptly. These are things that I tried to bring to the forefront. People don't, I get it, some people want to mock or scoff at, if there's sources or not, but there are real connections to the organization and the things that were going on there. And you said coaching. Which coach did Troy Weaver get to hire during any of his 4 years?
Monty Williams.
No, he didn't. He didn't.
Oh, yeah, and that's true.
He was running his own coaching search.
Yeah.
He was looking at his own individual.
It was going to be Kevin Ollie. I remember there was a lot of talk around Kevin Ollie around that time.
There was a serious debate between Kevin Ollie and Buck's assistant.
Was it Charles Lee?
Charles Lee.
Yeah.
Yep.
There was serious discussion between those two. And then out of the clear blue, it just became Monty Williams, and that was a push via the owner. And that's where, when you look at a Trajan Langdon was hired at a different position than Monty Williams, than Troy Weaver. Look at the original articles and all that. It says he was brought in effectively as an assistant GM to literally work under Arn Tellum and Ed Stefanski.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about some of the moves that you don't like, he wasn't 100%. But when some of those moves that we don't like the trade of Sadiq Bey for James Wiseman, you just have to follow the dots. Follow these things. Look at the connections, and you start to understand maybe there was a little bit of influence. So when you get Tom Gore saying, you know what, I still like my guys that are here, but on the basketball side of things, we probably need to bring in an actual president of basketball operations, which Troy Weaver never was. He was a GM. He never got what Joe Dumas had. Joe Dumars had the ability
He had
to
autonomy.
suggest
Yep.
and the ability to approve. Troy didn't necessarily have that full power, whereas Trajan does, and Trajan is that singular voice. You look at Bojan Bogdanovic. Why was he the vet that they brought in?
He was a
is the
Tellem
connection-
client.
Okay, and that's where I'm saying, like, okay, so you don't get to hire your coach. We don't know how much you got to pick your vets. We just know that the one thing that we know for certain that they left in your hand, which was drafting, he hit more times than he missed.
And
that's where you compartmentalize it and you say, you know what? Troy Weaver, tip the cap for the things that you did. And if it just wasn't his position, this is where it's more or less on Tom Boris, who was able to clean up and to effectively put in the right structure for us to see the Trajan Langdon, because he's crushing. He brought in a lot of good people for this front office, the coaching staff, and even following through on bringing in a Tim Hardaway, a Beasley, and a Tobias.
But that's the unfortunate part about this whole thing, is that Troy Weaver kind of had to be the sacrificial lamb, because when you look at Trajan, he doesn't have to deal with any of this shit. Yes, the Tellems are still technically around, but they don't have nearly the influence they had on this team. Trajan has been, like you said, granted powers that Troy never even had his whole tenure here. So I think that you got to take that into account when we're talking about who gets credit for what in certain areas. We love Trajan. We love some of the things, that he's done, but he hasn't had to deal with the same strife that Troy Weaver had to deal with, because like you said, during that whole tenure, we were saying, how much is Troy Weaver handcuffed? A lot of us felt like he was handcuffed.
Yeah, and I see Gromit and some others in the chat, and it's like, it's awesome to be able to talk about this in this kind of perspective right now, where they're having success, where we know Trajan Langdon is the guy. Like, I'm glad that they have a president of basketball operations now that can just handle everything, and it's his voice that's going to be what drives what this organization does from a basketball standpoint. I'm grateful for that now, because it's been a mess. They've been trying to spin this wheel for a long time. They brought in Stan Van Gundy and gave him president of basketball operations and coach, and then let him bring in a GM.
Yeah.
And that just didn't work. And then they tried to go as Stefanski, you're not going to be a GM, but you're going to run the department. And then they went to Troy Weaver. We're going to bring you in to kind of be an assistant GM, but we're still not going to have a president of basketball operations. This is how many different eras? How many? Over a decade, man, of non-traditional front office structure that now they're finally back to it. And they brought in a very smart, very well-established, very well-proven president of basketball operations in Trajan Langdon. And you know what? They did the same thing. They decided, we want a president of business operations, and brought in Melanie Harris, who has worked in the front, in the offices, and directly with Jordan Brand and Nike and others.
Yep.
And shout out to Melanie Harris, great person. Gave me a lot of time in terms of interviews and some off record stuff as well at the DIA event as well. So it's like they got good people, they have good leaders, and everybody that they've brought in has continued to honestly come up 7-7-7.
Y'all, you making great points. And when Trajan was first being considered, I think a lot of us were skeptical about this, because like you said, we all knew Trajan, from being over with the Pelicans. He's a great basketball mind. He's somebody that, it has his ear really close to the game and knows how to identify certain amounts of talent. Well, that's the same thing we heard about Troy Weaver coming